On a dark desert highway. Wait. That sounds like that old Eagles song. Let me rephrase that. While driving my rig through the desert late at night, trying to get back to the yard. There. That's better. Anyway, that's what we call the place where all the tractor trailers are kept, the yard. I saw something that terrified me, deep into the belly of my soul. I always thought it was a myth, a legend, something that truckers told themselves to keep themselves awake, but I was wrong. You see, was a cross-country truck driver for the Remington Trucking Company, based out of a very popular city in California. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. So, why not? Right? I mean, I had everything I needed in my sleeper cab, a bed, a microwave, a mini fridge, a portable DVD player, and a coffee pot. I could wash clothes, get a shower, and get some real food at a truck stop, and there were always lot lizards hanging around for any other needs, so to speak. Don't judge. Besides, cross-country truck drivers make a lot of money. Anyway, you don't care about that. You see, I grew up in Camp Springs, Maryland, and every time my parents and I would go visit my aunt and uncle and their family in New Jersey, my father would always take exit 7A on the Jersey Turnpike. You know, the truck route. He would ride that thing all the way down to exit 15, where it ends, and merges back into the turnpike itself. He claimed it was faster. That's how I became infatuated with 18-wheelers. It scared the crap out of my mom sometimes, but she'd just close her eyes, and try to sleep through it. I, on the other hand, loved it. Anyway, when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be a truck driver. So, I saved some money, from my cashier job at Billy's Burger Barn, and enrolled at a local truck driving school. I completed the 6-week course, and got my CDL. The school helped me find a job at the Remington Trucking Company. It was all the way across the country, but it was a job. And I've been here ever since. Anyway, I packed my stuff, said bye to my parents, got in my car, and headed for sunny California. I worked here for a couple years, drove their trucks, slept in the cab when I was on the road, slept in the shop when I was not, saved some money, and eventually bought my own rig, a used neon green Kenworth W900. I loved that rig. Well, that's enough about me, let me tell you what happened. Now, what I'm about to tell you, is something that I have never told anyone before, well, except my therapist. I was heading home, after delivering a load of tables, chairs, and sitting booths to a bar in Florida. Some guy named John was remodeling the place. Anyway, I got on Route 66 in Albuquerque, and began my final stretch home. It was about 2:30 in the morning. It was a beautiful night out that night, the full moon shining down on the road, not another vehicle in sight, just me and the white lines. I rolled the windows down, letting in the cool night desert air. I turned on the radio, and tuned it to KIOT, Coyote 102.5 Classic Rock. They were actually playing some decent songs that night. I drove down the road, rocking out, enjoying the trip, for about an hour and a half. The radio station then began to fade, so I just turned it off. I kept the windows down, and just rolled on. With only sound was the engine humming, and the wheels whining on the road, and nothing to look at, but the white lines. Now, I'm not sure if you know about what's called white line fever. If you do, then great. If you don't, then let me explain. It's basically highway hypnosis. It can happen to anyone, especially when you're driving at night. That's when the lines on the road going by so quickly, in a flashing pattern, hypnotize you, so you have no recollection of driving, or anything that happened while you were in that altered state. No. I'm serious. Look it up. Anyway, I caught the fever. The last thing I remember was turning off the radio, and suddenly I was sitting at a truck stop about 100 miles away, from where I last remembered being. I blinked my eyes, and shook my head, I need coffee. I told myself. I rolled the windows up, shut off the truck, and went inside. I got the largest cup of coffee they had, added cream and sugar, just how I like it, paid for it, and then went back out to my truck. I got in the truck, took a drink of the coffee, put the cup in the holder, put my seatbelt on, company rules and all, started the truck, wiped my eyes, put the truck in gear, and rolled out. I got back on the road and continued driving, drinking as much coffee as I possibly could, to try and stay awake. Now, as we all know, coffee is full of caffeine, which helps keep us awake. But, did you know that too much caffeine will cause it to counteract itself, and have the total opposite effect? Well, after about 10 minutes of pounding back that coffee, my eyes began to feel heavy. Wake up, Mike. Fight through it. You can make it. I told myself. But I was wrong, again. As each mile marker passed, my eyes became heavier and heavier. I felt myself start to doze off. I shook my head, to snap myself out of it, and reached for my coffee cup. In my sleepy state, I reached, but couldn't feel the cup. I took my eyes off the road for just a second, seeing the cup, and reaching for it. I turned my hazy eyes back to the road, and that was when I saw it. The black dog. As I rolled down Route 66, heading west to California, eyes heavy, barely able to stay awake, my headlights beaming out into the darkness that stood before me, it appeared, out of nowhere. Its eyes were blood red, its teeth were sharp and shiny, its coat was as black as the devil's soul, and its face was so hideous that I can't even describe it. That image will forever be burned into my subconscious mind. My headlights shined upon it, as it ran, full speed, down the center of the lane, directly toward the front of my truck. Holy shit, I screamed, as I hit the brakes, and whipped the cab hard to the right. My front passenger steer tire then went off the side of the road, falling a few inches onto the grass, and heading straight for a ditch. My rear drive wheels were next to follow. In my panicked state, I tried correcting the turn by whipping the cab hard to the left. I thought I was successful until momentum and inertia took over, causing the trailer to slam hard into the driver's side rear drive tires, causing the cab to slide diagonally down the road. I then felt the entire truck start to flip over on its side. I said a little prayer, put my hands over my eyes, and let whatever was going to happen happen. I screamed as the truck went over, and slammed hard on the ground, flinging me around like a rag doll. Thank God, I was wearing my seatbelt. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I hadn't been wearing it. Always wear your seatbelt. Anyway, the truck then slid about 30 yards, but never went into the ditch. It almost did, but thankfully, it did not. The sound of glass breaking, grinding metal filled the air, as well as thick gray smoke, and the smell of oil and other fluids from the truck's engine. Luckily, the gas tank was not damaged in the crash. When it was over, I just laid there, suspended almost upside down, in the air, still in my seatbelt. Thankful to still be alive, I reached up, grabbed the "oh shit" bar, and unlocked my seatbelt. My legs hit the gear shift, as my body fell. I maneuvered my legs off of it, still holding onto the bar, and stood on top of the broken glass from the passenger side window, letting go of the bar. Now, what happened next completely terrified me. I was about to call dispatch when I heard it. Now, I've heard other truckers talk about seeing the black dog, and the wreck that followed. But I never heard anything like what happened to me. Maybe they left this part out, I don't know. Because this was totally fucked up. As I stood there, I began to hear a low growling sound that intensified with every passing second, until it was almost at a deafening tone. I then heard a loud thud, followed by scratching on the driver's side door, right above me. I'm glad I rolled the windows up when I left the truck stop, I thought, as that was the only window not cracked or broken. I saw bright red lights shoot across the window. At first, I thought they were lights, but they were not. "What the fuck is that?" I said, followed by another loud thud on the ground. Now, for some reason, I turned and looked out the windshield, which was severely cracked, and saw two bright red eyes staring directly at me, through the cracked windshield. This thing was mere inches away from me. Its face then came into focus, its snout was pulsating, as it opened its mouth, revealing row after row of immensely white teeth. No. Not teeth. Fangs. It was drooling and foaming at the mouth. I screamed, and jumped between the driver's seat and the passenger seat into the sleeper, which was totally destroyed by the way. My shoulder landing hard on the edge of the mini fridge. I thought I broke it. I screamed out in pain. I grabbed my shoulder, and sat down on the top of my now broken microwave. I hunched over as far as I could and ducked my head down, so I couldn't be seen. The dog then barked the most loudest, and most demonic, evil bark that I've ever heard. Worse than those evil dogs in that 80s horror movie, Devil Dogs. Now, I'm not a very religious man. I mean, I believe in God, carry a Bible with me on long trips, and all that good stuff. But, I don't go to church, and I've never even read the Bible. But, at that moment in time, I wished I did. Anyway, I saw the Bible amidst all the rubble. I picked it up, held it close to my chest, and prayed, and prayed, and prayed for this thing to go away. It did not go away. Periodically, I would stick my head up above the side of the passenger seat, and see it standing there, growling and barking, though out the next 3.5 hours. Now, as I said before, I never told anyone this story, besides my therapist, well, and a guy named Rooster. You see, I had been having night terrors because of it. I would wake up screaming, in the middle of the night, about 3 to 4 times a week. It traumatized me so much that I stopped driving at night, in fear of seeing that dog. I knew I needed help. So, I called a therapist. I told her this story, and told her about my night terrors. She diagnosed me with PTSD, and prescribed me Zoloft, once a day. I take it at night, since it makes me drowsy. Anyway, it helps a little bit, I don't wake up screaming half as much. She also suggested that instead of keeping the whole traumatic experience bottled up inside of me, that I should tell as many people as I possibly could what happened. So that's what I'm doing here. Anyway, back to the story. Like I was saying, the dog stood there for 3.5 hours. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something heavy hitting the glass. I stuck my head above the seat, one last time, to see the dog rush toward the glass, hitting its head hard against it, cracking it a little more. It stepped back, let out an ear-piercing growl, its eyes glowing brighter, as it charged the glass once again. This time breaking through it. Pieces of glass shot everywhere. I screamed, as I fell back to my sitting position, held the Bible close, and began reciting the Lord's Prayer. I was completely scared shitless. I then saw its head rise above the passenger seat, and stare directly at me, eyes glowing, fangs showing, and mouth foaming. It snarled, drew back, and was just about to pounce on me, when it let out this ear-piercing shriek of pain, and began shaking violently. Thick gray smoke then began pouring out of its eye sockets, its ears, and its mouth. I screamed again. As I did, I saw that dog explode into cloud of thick gray smoke, and disappear into thin air. I cleared the smoke with my hand, coughed a little, only to realize that the sun was beginning to rise. Sunlight must kill this thing, I thought. I had never been so glad to see the sunrise in my life. The dog was gone. What the fuck, I said, completely exhausted. I took a deep breath, as my fear began to subside. I sat the Bible on the microwave next to me, and pulled out my cell phone. I then called dispatch. I gave them my location, told them I flipped my truck, and how long I had been out there. I didn't tell them what really happened. Dispatch said they would send out a recovery rotator truck, and a heavy-duty tow truck. I thanked them, and ended the conversation, putting my phone back in my pocket. I then took a deep breath, slowly crept over the passenger seat, reached up, and grabbed the CB. I pressed the button and said, "Breaker 1 to 9. This is Vanilla Mike. I am 10 to 34, in need of assistance. Anyone got their ears on out there, come back," hoping it still worked. Shortly after I put that out on the radio, I got a response. "Yeah. Vanilla Mike, this is Red Rooster. I hear you're 10 to 34. What's your 20? I then gave him my location. That's what 20 means in trucker lingo. Anyway, about 30 minutes went by, when I heard the sound of air brakes. I stood up on the side of the seat, and looked out the driver's side window, to see a red 18-wheeler stopped on the shoulder of the road, right behind my truck. I then climbed out of the window, maneuvered over to the hood, slid down it to the ground below, walked around the front of my truck, and began walking over to the red truck. A long red-haired older gentleman climbed out of the cab, met me halfway, and shook my hand. We introduced ourselves to each other. He reminded me of Willie Nelson, wearing a cowboy hat, and a pair of cowboy boots. Anyway, he looked at my truck, then asked what happened. I told him. He said, "Yup, I seen that black sumbitch back in '73, dead of night, came out of nowhere, jackknifed my rig, almost lost my load and my life. Ugly little sucker. It woke me the hell up though." "You alright?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken up," I answered. My shoulder was killing me. Anyway, he then invited me to sit in his truck, and said he would wait with me until the recovery truck arrived. We talked for about 2 hours, about everything under the sun, drinking coffee, telling jokes, and laughing. He had his own coffee maker. Anyway, the recovery truck, and the tow truck finally arrived. It was about 10:30 at that point. It took them 4.5 hours to get my truck upright. The cops had to shut down the westbound lane to do so, and they gave me a ticket for inattentive driving. I just paid it, the judge wouldn't have believed me anyway. Now, once my truck was back upright, and I secured a ride home from the tow truck driver, I said goodbye to Rooster. He climbed in his truck, hit the horn a couple times, and just rolled on. He was a good man. I hope our paths cross again one day, under better circumstances of course. Anyway, I then took a look at the damage. It was massive. I was lucky to be alive. If I would have went left, and fell on the driver's side, would have surely died. That's it. I'm done, I told myself, once was enough for me. I never stepped foot in a rig ever again. The owner of the trucking company was nice enough to have the truck towed back to the shop, at his expense. I signed it over to him, and he put it, damaged and all, in the side yard of the shop, with a sign across the windshield that reads, "Believe the myth." Now, even though I don't drive, or ride in a truck anymore, I still work here. I am now in charge of dispatch. The old dispatcher took my job. Good luck to him. Anyway, it pays a lot less money, but I'm okay with that. I don't have to worry about seeing that dog anymore. Now, I assign drivers their loads, provide mapping information, ensure the product is loaded properly, as well as many other things. I rent a room at the Flop House down the street. The room is about as big as my sleeper cab was, maybe a little bigger. There's a bed, a dresser, a lamp, and a rolling clothes rack like you see in laundromats in the corner. I had to buy a new mini fridge, a new microwave, and a new coffee pot, as they were all damaged in the crash. I also bought a small flat screen TV, and a DVD player. The Flop House don't have cable. Anyway, there's a shared bathroom with 3 showers, side by side, at the end of the hall, and a couple coin-operated washers and dryers downstairs. It's really not that bad. I don't mess with lot lizards anymore. No. I got a real girlfriend named Natasha. I met her at Chelsea's restaurant. My shoulder is doing fine, it was just badly bruised. Now, in closing, I would just like to say to any of you truckers out there. If you feel your eyes getting heavy, and it's hard to focus on the road, please Please. Promise me that you'll stop. Pull over on the side of the road, stop at a gas station, stop somewhere, because the black dog is no myth. It's no legend. No. That dog is real. I've seen it, and it's got one hell of a bite. I've been working as a truck driver for well over 10 years now, but I only recently changed companies. I actually would have stayed in my own company, but when my friend Jake told me how much his company paid, I practically begged him to get me a job there. He referred me there and I got the job after a quick interview. The interview itself was very strange, because I was asked some questions I didn't expect, like, have you ever abandoned your vehicle on the road, are you afraid of the dark, are you religious, etc. I answered everything truthfully and got hired right on the spot, so I didn't think twice about the oddity of the questions. My job was to transport dried meat products to a small town, and for some reason, the company said it could only be done at night and that I had to be there by morning. I'm used to night shifts and the handsome pay more than compensated for it, so I didn't complain. When the time came for my first tour, Jake explained which route I should take to get to my destination, stating the GPS was off a little. Before I entered the truck, he sent a message to my phone and told me to listen to it when I get on the road, since it explained some basic rules I should follow. I thanked him and started driving. When I got on the old road which Jake told me to take, I opened the message he sent me and realized it was an audio recording from him. Here's what it said. Hey Paul, welcome to the company. Now I know you're an experienced truck driver, but our company has a list of rules you need to strictly follow while you're driving. I'm gonna lay them out for you here and you make sure to follow them as best you can. I'll also send you a text message so you can read the rules in case you aren't sure. Now first of all, make sure to turn on your high beams and keep them on at all times, since it's really dark on the road. You may notice that even with the lights on it's really dark, but don't let that concern you. Within the first 10 miles you may see a dead end sign ahead. Ignore it and just keep driving. If your lights start flickering by this point, speed up and drive as fast as you can until the flickering stops. You may see an old man hitchhiking by the road at this point. Make sure to stop your vehicle and ask him where he's going. If he says, to the nearest town, let him in. If he says anything else, floor it and don't look back. If you do let him in, he will remain quiet for about an hour while you're driving and then he'll ask you to stop and let him out, despite being in the middle of nowhere. Do what he says, but once he's out, don't look at him while he's walking into the night. You should be well within the 20th mile by now. If you start to hear any banging or growling noises coming from the back of the truck, ignore them. They'll go away faster if you maintain a consistent driving speed, so try to do that. Before you reach the 30th mile, make sure to turn off your radio if it was on until now. Turning it down will not work, so make sure to turn it off. This is really important. By the 35th mile, your radio will suddenly turn on and will be at highest volume. Now it's really important that you pay attention here. If a song plays, any song, simply turn it down, or off. But if you only hear static, stop your truck right away, turn off the engine, lie down on the seat and close your eyes. Try to be as still as possible and keep your eyes closed. You'll hear tapping on the windshield and roof, but you'll be okay as long as you keep your eyes closed. Even if you hear the truck door opening, don't move. Whatever opens them will close them in a few seconds after sniffing around. Once the noises around the truck stop, you can open your eyes slowly and look at your driver's window. If the window is fogged up, wait one more minute. Otherwise you can sit back up and continue driving. By the 50th mile, you'll start to see something running along your truck on all fours on the side of the road. No matter how fast you go, it will always keep up with your truck, but it's advised you maintain a speed of at least 60 miles per hour. Try to keep your eyes on the road because there's a curve, after which the creature will be gone. If the creature is still following you after the curve, speed up and hope you lose it by the next curve. You only have 3 curves, so make them count. By the 70th mile, your truck will sputter to a halt. Remain as calm as you can and try restarting the engine as fast as you can. Don't look in the rearview mirror at the figures running towards your truck. Just start the engine, and as soon as you do, floor it. You'll notice by mile 80 that it's getting really hot inside the truck. Don't bother with the air condition, because it won't work. Try taking off your jacket, but don't open the window under any circumstances. Try not to fall asleep either, because even though the road goes straight, you may find yourself swerving off a cliff if you close your eyes. If you need to use the bathroom, only do it between the 85th and 90th mile and make sure to keep your high beams on while you're doing it. Do not step off the road or out of the light. When you're done taking a leak, you may see someone move behind your truck just as you turn around. Don't try following them, because you'll just endlessly move around the truck just in time for them to always get behind the next corner, and they want you to stay outside as long as possible. If you hear a high-pitched scream in the distance while you're taking a leak, run back to the truck and floor it. I don't care if you piss your pants, but do not waste a second running back. Regardless of the mileage, at around 3 a.m. your phone will start ringing. Don't answer it, no matter who it is, even me. The caller will try to get you to answer 3 times before sending you a message. Don't open the message, either. Again, whoever it's from, ignore it. By the 100th mile you may see a pair of beams from other vehicles in the distance moving toward you. If you do, turn off your lights immediately and wait for the other truck to pass by. Once it does, you may turn your lights back on. Repeat for any other oncoming vehicles. Do not honk or do anything to attract their attention. Keep looking in the rearview mirror, and if you see the beams of the truck turning around and coming back towards you, drive away as fast as you can and pray you are faster. Now, when you reach the 120th mile, you'll see a sign for a 20 miles per hour speed limit. Slow down to 20 miles per hour and do not go over that speed, since the sound can attract unwanted attention. You can speed up once you see another sign that tells you the speed limit stops at that point. At around mile 130, you may see a woman waving and asking for your help. Do not slow down and try not to even look at her. Once she's behind you, look in the rearview mirror. If she's still on the road, you're safe. If she's gone, just look straight and don't even think about looking at the passenger's seat, no matter what you see with your peripheral vision. Once you reach 140th mile, you're safe. From here, it's a straight shot to your destination. Don't try to turn your truck around at any point while you're on the road, because you'll end up driving until you're out of gas, and if that happens, you're as good as dead. Don't use your GPS until you reach the town either, because it will take you to an old dirt road which will have you driving in a loop. Once you reach the client's place, the employees will take care of the rest. Let me know if you have any questions. I listened to the message and laughed, thinking Jake simply wants to prank me. That was before my lights started flickering. From a young age I was told to never talk to strangers, and through my childhood I never did. However, in adult life things change. There is more reason to talk with people you don't know, especially when lonely. When I became a truck driver, the long and empty roads got the better of me, and I'd start giving lifts to hitchhikers who were going to the same place I was. It was the perfect solution for my loneliness, and often I would become friends with the people I gave lifts to. My job was absolutely perfect until that one November night. I had dropped off my cargo at the designated warehouse and was on my way back to the depot. It was going to be a long drive through the night. A few hours into the drive I saw a man at the side of the road, with a black bag and a plaque reading the exact same place I was going. Usually past a certain time I would ignore it and continue my journey, but something about this man made me feel like I owed it to him and I could do with some company on the journey anyway. I pulled over, opened my window and asked him where he was going, even though I had already read the sign. He just pointed at his plaque and looked up at me. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was too late now, and I told him to hop in. This was a huge mistake. The man climbed in and sat in the passenger seat. He was dressed completely in black, with a silver chain spilling out of the top pocket of his overcoat. At first I was hesitant, then I got myself together and shook his hand. It was cold, very cold. Not the kind of cold when it has been chilly outside, but the kind when someone has a fever. A wet, clammy, unnatural cold. I looked at his face. He looked like he was in his late 50s, with a gray beard and harsh eyes that put you in your place. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He sent back a rough mumble that didn't sound like a name. All I said was, "Pleased to meet you," and got back onto the road. I decided it best not to try and talk too much to the man unless he talked first. He didn't look like the kind of guy that you'd want to say the wrong thing to. After a couple of minutes, I began to notice how he was constantly rummaging inside the bag. It was making a rather unnerving clinking sound of metal hitting other metal. After around an hour of driving, the man had not stopped rummaging inside the bag. I had also noticed that he had been staring at me for some time, which was creeping me out massively. It really made my skin crawl. On most occasions, if I have a passenger who is not particularly communicative, I would put the radio on, but mine had stopped working last week and I still needed to get it fixed. In an effort to stop him staring at me, I asked him, "What's in the bag?" I immediately regretted it. He looked right at me and said in a raspy voice, "Mind your own business." I was slightly shocked by this and tried to pass it off as a bit of a sarcastic joke. Although I knew for sure it wasn't. Throughout the journey the rummaging got louder and louder and he started making stranger noises in an extremely low tone. I was so unsettled I began thinking of what to do. I could not go another 3 hours with this man in my truck. He was now clanging whatever was in his bag very hard. He then stopped and started scraping what sounded like a knife against something else. I had enough and pulled into the side of the road. I didn't want to confront this guy, but I asked him once more, "What's in the bag?" Once again he responded with, "Mind your own business." I nodded and said that we had a puncture on the back tire and asked him if he'd mind checking it out, whilst I got the repair kit. He looked at me with a look of complete hatred, then got out of the truck and went round the back. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I saw him in my tail lights stare after me with what looked like a smile spread across his face. His hands looked like they were covered in blood. I still see that image every time I close my eyes. I made it back to the depot, trying desperately to forget the man. Then I realized. He had left his bag. Obviously, I could not help but look in it, but I wish I hadn't. The bag was full of different metal objects, all of them looking like some kind of torture device. From knives and shackles to ropes and bars. I then realized, they were all covered in blood. I don't know why I didn't turn the bag into the police, but I thought that because it had my fingerprints on, it would not end well for me. I took the bag home and did some more searching through it, and to my horror, at the bottom of the bag was a picture of my truck, a picture of the registration and a picture of me holding the bag. I could hardly sleep, but in the end I managed to get a few hours. I definitely couldn't go to the police now. It looked like the bag belonged to me, but I decided that I had to. I put the bag in a box and was about to walk out of the door when I noticed something. The picture of me holding the bag was nailed into the door with a note attached. All it read was, "Mind your own business." As a trucker, I travel a lot, traveling to places I wish I hadn't been. As a trucker, I see a lot, seeing some things I wish I'd never seen. As a trucker, I experience a lot, experiencing things I wish I'd never experienced. But it is these things that make me who I am, and that is why I love the job, not knowing what I'll run into next. However, unknowing means you cannot foreplan how you will act in certain situations, and I do not make the right choices in certain situations. At all. I was in the UK a while back, taking a load up to the north of England. It was dark with few stars in the sky. I couldn't quite focus on the road for some reason, and kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes passed of me doing this. I looked up, and caught it right in my headlights. Sprawled out on the ground was a body. It wasn't moving. I pulled the truck into the side and climbed out. I approached the body slowly. I cautiously asked, "Are you okay, sir?" No reply. I walked over, about to take his pulse. I then realized there was no need. Blood was oozing out from underneath him, an obvious stab wound. It was clear to see the man was dead, and I knew that I had to call the police. I dialed 999 and explained to them what I had found. They said that they would send someone out to me, and to stay put. A few moments later I heard voice, shouting, and the sound of footsteps, fast footsteps, hitting the floor hard. I could make out the silhouettes of two men, one carrying a bag. I knew exactly what that was for. I sprinted back to my truck and clambered in, heart pounding. How could this be happening to me? That was the question thumping inside my head. The men had made it to the body now, one chucking the bag onto, then running for his car. I hadn't seen them parked on the other side of the road. The second man ran over to my truck and started trying to climb up. I opened the door powerfully on his face. He cried out in agony and fell backwards. I did the only thing I could think to do. Drive. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and got out of there as quickly as I could, relieved that I had got away in time. The relief didn't last long, as I noticed headlights behind me. I was being chased down, and of course, he was much faster than me. The car behind me was gradually gaining. I knew I couldn't outrun him, but I sure could outsize him. I waited until he was right on my tail and then crushed the brake. I was flung forward in my seat. By the time I had recovered, he was gone. I did not know where, or how I hadn't hit him. I saw a turning a few yards to the left and could only assume he had taken that. I put my foot down once again. I wanted to make sure that the other man did not catch up. I had been speeding along for a good 5 minutes when I noticed something in the middle of the road ahead. It was two cars. Two cars that I recognized. It was the men. They had formed some kind of roadblock. 1,000 thoughts were spinning around in my head. Had I really stumbled across something that serious that these people needed me dead? Why would they not just attempt to get away? What do I do now? Earlier I talked about how in certain situations I make the wrong choices. Now was one of these times. I plowed straight through the block and didn't stop. The cops arrived at the scene and questioned me on what happened and how two cars ended up lying wrecked in the middle of the road. I told them what I had done. One man had been hospitalized and the other had escaped on foot. Detectives found fresh tire marks nearby and deduced that the man had got away by car. It turned out that the men were gang leaders. The two of them had killed the man I found on the side of the road, who was also identified as the leader of a gang. I still curse myself that the other man got away. For some reason I can never shake of the feeling that somehow, I'll see him again. I have not been posting lately as I was off on a haul for a while. Whilst on that, something happened to me. Something awful. I can hardly close my eyes anymore without worrying something from my past will come back to get me. What happened to me on my most recent haul has darkened my past even more. Whilst my mind tries to repress these things, it also tries to convince me that they are not over, and whoever has troubled me is coming back. I was taking my cargo through the mountains, no service on my phone, no reception on the radio. Just the sound of nothing. It has been like this for miles, just me, my truck, and the road ahead. It was very refreshing, exactly what I needed after the trauma of my past years. I noticed the time and sped up. I wanted to be out of the mountains before dark, but at this rate it wasn't looking likely. Some time went on and I was busting for a piss. I pulled up and got out. I was finishing up when I noticed something in the not so far distance. This was the first time I saw it. A creature resembling a man, a large man. I was about to call out when I realized that something was wrong with his face. I slowly came to the realization that this wasn't a man at all. The shocking thing was, it wasn't any animal I'd seen before either. It stared straight at me. The 2-hour silence was finally broken by the loud cracking of twigs as this thing charged straight at me. I sprinted back to the van and got in. I immediately shoved the keys into the ignition. My peaceful trance had been snapped. I slammed down the accelerator, something I had to do way too much these days. As I began to roll off, I saw the thing burst from the tree line and onto the road behind me. I was picking up speed, but so was the creature. I finally made it to 20 kilometers per hour. I looked in the rear view mirror and saw the thing standing in the road, staring after me with a snarl on its face. If it was a face at all. This thing must have been a seriously disformed man. It had a human's body but the stance of a wolf on its hind legs, its face much too big for a person. The eyes were not aligned and the mouth had retreated too far up its face. I shook my head and drove on. Another thing for my mind to repress and another thing to make my therapist tell me I'm crazy. I had covered a lot of ground and had almost made it out of the mountain range. Dusk had fallen hard onto the horizon and I had almost forgotten about what I had seen. My radio began to crackle, meaning I was picking a reception and it looked like my phone had a bar of signal. I was relieved and in the first time in ages I smiled. The smile was ripped from my face as I looked out of my window. Upon a high-up rock to the side of me was the clear silhouette of the man. Its head turned and fixed on my truck. My heart sank down into my gut, and continued its descent as I saw the thing jump off the rock and charge down the hillside towards me. How the hell had it made it this far? There was no possible way for the man to have gotten there on foot. My confusion ceased when I noticed how close it was to me. I sped up, building speed way too slowly. The man was close now, almost able to grab onto the side of the rig. I noticed a corner up ahead. In the wing mirror I saw him about to jump onto the back. I turned the corner very sharply. The thing had missed its opportunity and bounded off into the hills. I drove on for many miles. The darkness had settled now. I realized that my radio had stopped crackling and my phone still had no signal. I was sure I was meant to be out of the mountains by now. I stopped, looked at my map and immediately knew I had taken the wrong turn. I had followed the signposts and had taken the sign that had pointed to the main road. I thought back and recalled that the sign had been pretty wonky and had been tipped upside down. I realized how much of a fool I had been. Obviously it was the wrong road as the sign its right way up would have pointed the other way. In all my fear I hadn't batted an eyelid. Looking at my map there was nowhere to turn round for miles. With a heavy sigh I drove on. As I set off I could have sworn I saw something in the trees. Along the road I kept noticing something walking behind the tree line, but I only saw it every couple of miles. I didn't even want to think about what it was. After what seemed like the longest drive of my life I had reached the turning point, and began to swing the truck around. Once I was facing the right direction I let out a whimper. It was standing in the road in front of me. I got a better look at him this time. It was a man. He was tall and very wide. His face, like I had noticed earlier, was extremely disformed. He began to walk at me, very fast. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't wait there and I couldn't reverse. I locked my door and drove forwards, hoping to scare him off. For a brief moment I thought I did. He began to walk around the side. I then heard him climbing up the passenger side. I grabbed the keys from my pocket and locked the doors. In the same second I heard the heart-wrenching tug on the handle. A split second later and that thing would have been inside. I swore, and I drove. The man was pounding on the window now, extremely hard. Thud, thud, thud. This was the single most horrifying moment of my life. I don't know what I was thinking, but I wound down the window a small amount. The man instantly stuck his fingers through. I then wound the window up quickly. He screamed and pulled them out, falling onto the roadside. I carried on driving, not looking back once. I made it onto the main road, turned the radio up to full and almost cried when I saw other cars. My phone had signal and I called my boss, telling him what had happened. He didn't believe me of course and told me to take the next few days off, and that he'd book me an appointment with the therapist in the morning. I felt so safe back on the busy road, and was the happiest I had ever been to see traffic in my life. I lay in my bed that night, running things over in my head. As I looked out of my window, I was almost sure I could see something watching me. Surprisingly, I went straight to sleep, and didn't wake up for 16 hours. I would never be driving a mountain route again. It was a night like any other on the desolate highways that crisscrossed through the heart of nowhere. My name's Jake, and I'm a truck driver, been hauling cargo through the lonesome roads for over a decade. The kind of life that keeps you company with the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. That night, I found myself on a particularly eerie stretch of road, swallowed by an impenetrable fog. The kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud, concealing the world beyond. The only companions were the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist and the rhythmic beat of raindrops on the roof of my rig. I'd heard rumors on the CB radio about this stretch, a place where truckers whispered of abandoned cars, tales of drivers gone missing without a trace. It was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned drivers, but I'd always scoffed at such stories. That is until that night. As I maneuvered through the winding road, the fog became denser, almost palpable. Visibility dropped to a few feet ahead, and the low hum of the engine seemed swallowed by an oppressive silence. The glow of my headlights refracted off the mist, casting eerie shadows that danced like wraiths in the night. It was then that I saw him, a silhouette on the side of the road. A man, or so it seemed, standing motionless in the fog. My instincts told me to keep going, but the human in me wanted to lend a helping hand. I eased off the gas, and the truck rolled to a stop beside him. He was oddly pale, and the fog clung to his form like a ghostly cloak. But what sent a shiver down my spine were his eyes, big, round, and as black as the void itself. His mouth, a gaping maw, stretched wide in a manner that defied the laws of anatomy. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. The man-creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, staring into the fog. With a lump in my throat, I decided to get going. But as I revved up the engine, I glanced back at him. That's when I saw it, the twisted, grotesque smile that curled on his featureless face. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, leaving the fog-draped figure behind. As I drove away, I grabbed the radio mic to share my unsettling encounter with fellow truckers. But to my dismay, the once buzzing airwaves were silent. No static, no voices, just an unsettling void that mirrored the fog outside. The road seemed endless, and I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in protest. I needed distance from that creature, needed the safety of the city lights. But as the miles blurred together, the fog persisted, unyielding. I drove way over 100 miles and was sure. That creature was far away and I will never met it again. In the distance, a lonely parking lot emerged, and I decided it was time to pull over. The weariness and fear clawed at me, and I desperately needed a moment to collect myself. I shut off the engine, closed the curtains, and tried to shake off the encounter as mere imagination. Little did I know that the night had only just begun, and the horrors lurking in the fog were far from done with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and nestled into my bunk, hoping that the haunting image of that pale figure with the unnaturally large eyes and twisted smile would fade away with the night. But sleep remained elusive. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, a sense of impending doom washed over me, jolting me awake. A shiver ran down my spine as I fumbled to open the curtains. The parking lot was bathed in an eerie glow from the flickering overhead lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fog. That's when I saw them again, 3 of those nightmarish creatures. They stood like sentinels, their dark eyes fixed on the truck. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to turn on the cabin lights, revealing their ghastly features in all their horrifying glory. Their mouths, wide open, emitted guttural growls that reverberated through the metal walls of the truck. The air in the cabin grew thick with an otherworldly presence, a malevolence that seeped through every pore of my being. I reached for the ignition, praying that the truck would roar to life and carry me far away from this nightmare. But nothing happened. The engine remained silent, as if in protest against the encroaching terror. The creatures, sensing my vulnerability, began to advance. Their movements were unsettlingly smooth, almost as if they were gliding across the asphalt. The growls intensified, echoing through the desolate parking lot. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as desperation set in. My hands trembled as I repeatedly turned the key, willing the engine to respond. The growls escalated into a cacophony, and the creatures closed in, their features contorted in a grotesque display of hunger. Just as the creatures were about to reach the truck, a surge of relief washed over me as the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into drive, the truck jolting forward, leaving the creatures behind in the rearview mirror. As the truck sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were not bound by the laws of the physical world. Their terrifying growls echoed in the distance, even as the city lights finally emerged on the horizon. I dared a glance back, and to my horror, I saw the creatures running after the truck with unnatural speed, far beyond anything human. It was as if the shadows themselves were chasing me. As I drove into the welcoming glow of city lights, the creatures abruptly halted. Their twisted forms lingered at the edge of the urban sprawl, their growls fading into the night. Relief mingled with a lingering dread as I realized they had a boundary, a limit to their reach. I parked the truck in a well-lit area, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio mic once more, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. But the static-filled airwaves remained stubbornly silent. The city lights seemed to push back the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were still out there, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. The night was far from over, and the road ahead held more horrors than I could fathom. I spent the restless hours of the night parked in that well-lit haven, the city lights warding off the encroaching darkness. But no matter how brightly the urban landscape glowed, the images of those nightmarish creatures lingered in the recesses of my mind, their growls echoing like a sinister melody. As dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of fog, with a newfound paranoia. The city lights gradually faded in the rearview mirror as the road stretched into another desolate expanse. My radio crackled to life, the sudden sound making me jump. It was a voice, a fellow trucker. "Hey, you there? You okay?" The voice sounded concerned, and I eagerly responded, recounting the horrors of the night, the fog-shrouded figures, the broken radio, and the unrelenting pursuit. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke, heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're not alone. We've all heard those stories, the abandoned cars, the creatures in the fog. But we always thought they were just stories." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had faced those monstrous entities. The radio buzzed with hushed conversations among truckers, each sharing their own encounters with the supernatural on this stretch of road. The stories varied, but a common thread emerged: those creatures, with their haunting eyes and twisted smiles, were a malevolent force that seemed drawn to the lonely roads in the dead of night. No one knew their origin or their purpose, but they left a trail of fear in their wake. As I continued my journey, the unease persisted. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the fog clung to the edges of the highway like a malevolent specter. I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were watching, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The radio chatter intensified, with truckers exchanging advice on how to avoid the creatures, sharing tales of those who had disappeared without a trace. The fear was palpable, a shared experience that bound us together in the face of the unknown. With each passing mile, the city lights became a distant memory. The road ahead was swallowed by an impenetrable fog, and the radio once again fell silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. As I approached the familiar stretch where I first encountered the creatures, a sense of dread settled over me. The fog thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Then, a haunting realization struck me: this road was a loop, an unending circuit that brought travelers back to the heart of the supernatural. The city lights, the camaraderie on the radio, all illusions meant to deceive. The creatures weren't bound by distance, they were bound by time, forever haunting those who dared traverse this cursed stretch. A guttural growl echoed through the fog, and the twisted figures emerged once again. Their black eyes bore into my soul, their gaping mouths emitting an otherworldly wail. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest, but the truck seemed tethered to the nightmarish loop. As the creatures closed in, the fog swallowed everything, and the road became an unending void. The last thing I saw were those eyes, an abyss that seemed to consume all light. The radio crackled to life one final time, a chorus of terrified voices screaming a warning. But it was too late. The creatures closed in, and the world descended into darkness. And so, the haunted highway claimed another victim, lost to the eternal night and the malevolent creatures that lurked within the fog. The loop continued, a never-ending cycle of horror, trapping the unwary in an unending nightmare. The road stretched on, shrouded in fog, a haunted path that few dared to traverse, and even fewer escape. I know there's a lot of stories from truck drivers floating around the internet. I also know that a lot of these stories feature similar elements to each other, and some of those elements I've experienced myself. What I'm here to share, though, are some things that I've gone through on the road that I haven't seen regaled elsewhere. I've been driving for the last 9 years, and I've loved it since the moment I started my first job. I work independently, meaning that I bid for delivery contracts against other driving services, be they independent or companies. I'm not married and I have no kids, so driving around the country is ideal for me. Doing so independently allows me to pick and choose where I go, and when. Driving alone at night on an empty road can get a bit unsettling, despite listening to movies, TV shows, and music all the while. It's the solidarity of driving for hours without seeing another living soul, that fact that if something were to happen, no one would be around to hear you scream, that make the prospect a bit off-putting. The rules of no sleep state that only one story is allowed per post, so I will do my best to provide as much detail in each of my tales to make it worth your while. Back in 2011, I was tasked with hauling a load from the distributor in Detroit, Michigan, to Seattle, Washington, and due to overnight construction on the interstate, I needed to take a road called Montana Highway 200. That road is the epitome of what I described earlier, hours of driving without seeing another living soul. Due to my schedule, I found myself traversing this stretch of road around 11 p.m. I was wide awake, though, so I decided to push on. I was about 130 miles east of the city of Great Falls, Montana, and I was watching one show or another, just kinda spacing out as I drove through the dark. All the electronics of the rig suddenly flickered. The laptop screen went black for a few quick moments, as did the headlights and the lights on the sides of the truck. After a few seconds, all was fine, though I was a bit perturbed, because the lights on the truck were the only lights around me. Without them, I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. I continued driving for another few miles, and everything flickered a few more times. I came up over a hill and the headlights dimmed severely, to the point I could only see a few feet past the front of the truck. As I reached the bottom of the hill, the lights suddenly surged. The brights were brighter than they'd ever been, the interior lights of the truck were on at 110% power, the orange lights on the side of the truck glowed brightly into the darkness that surrounded me. And with that, the truck shut off. I came rolling to a stop at the bottom of the hill and spent some time trying to fix the issue, ultimately finding myself unable to get the truck started back up. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and of course, I had no signal. With nothing in front of or behind me for 50 miles, and the fact that I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road since I got on it, I decided the only thing I could really do is try to get a signal on my phone to call AAA. I grabbed a flashlight, got out of the truck and began doing the ever-popular, hold your phone up in the air, move while I walked aimlessly in the dark. I think it was because I was so focused on the truck and my phone that I didn't realize how terrifying it was out there. The stars weren't very bright, and the moon was resting comfortably behind trees in the distance. Being at the bottom of a hill didn't help. I stayed close to the truck but wandered around a bit looking for any semblance of a signal. When I still couldn't get any, I shined my flashlight around a bit and saw a hill on the opposite side of the road. Just as I was going to go to the hill, I saw a light in the distance, the unmistakable glow of headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, then looked down at my phone, then back up, and the lights were substantially closer than they just had been, much too close for a car to be driving. Then I blinked, and once again they were gone, but at that same moment, it was like the sounds of the world stopped. Cicadas in the distance ceased, crickets went silent, and the sound of blowing wind evaporated, and with that, it was completely, deafeningly, ear-shatteringly silent. It was so quiet that it was disorienting. I leaned against the truck while I got my bearings, and then once again tried to find the lights that had been driving toward me, but I couldn't see them. I shined my flashlight around me, out into the distance, trying to find the hill I had wanted to climb to try to get signal on my phone, but I was taken aback when something else caught my eye. A door. Off the side of the road, maybe 10 to 15 yards out, there was a door. It was a door like any one you'd find in a house. Intrigued, I walked over to it, with a cautious reserve. It was in a frame, and had a doorknob and everything. As I got closer, I felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety come over me. I wasn't scared, necessarily, but rather, nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't hear anything, a car may or may not have been heading in my direction, and there was a door standing in what was quite literally the middle of nowhere. It was just an overload of things I didn't understand. I reached the door and walked around it, and it was just that, a door, standing free in the middle of a huge open field. Now that I was closer, I could see that there was a design in the door, flowers to be precise, painted in very light pastel colors, so light that even if it was the middle of the day I wouldn't have been able to see them from where I'd first noticed the door. As I was inspecting it, my sense of hearing returned, and I was hit with a flood of noise. Like the lights that amplified a short time prior, the sounds blared like my head was inside a speaker. The sounds of crickets and cicadas nearly brought me to my knees before they returned to normal levels. I had barely had a chance to collect myself when I saw movement near the front of the truck. I shined my light towards it, and for a split second I saw a glimpse of what looked like a person moving from my line of vision to behind the truck. I yelled out to whoever it was with a generic, "Hey," and abandoned my interest in the door. I lightly jogged over to the truck and with the same cautious reserve, I turned the corner to see who was by the truck. The same thing happened, though, and as I turned the corner, so did whoever it was that was there, only at the other end of the truck, and I saw the same glimpse of a possible person now moving behind the trailer. Instead of chasing them the way they were going, I moved in the opposite direction, and tried to meet them around the other side of the truck, but when I did, I saw no one. I couldn't hear any footsteps or anything. It was like I'd imagined someone there, only I knew I hadn't. I decided to look under the truck, to see if I could see the feet of whoever it was. I crouched down, got as low as I needed to see underneath the trailer and shined my flashlight. Of course, I saw no one. But at that moment, I felt eyes on me. The feeling was unmistakable. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. I slowly stood back up, and shuddered when I was finally upright. I then felt a warm breath on my neck, and quickly spun around, only to find myself face to face with someone. I still don't know what I was looking at. Their face was a blur, like it was vibrating almost, but not. I know that's a terrible description, but it's the only way I can think of to put it. If you've ever seen the show The Flash, think of Reverse Flash, but only their face. The only feature I could make out was actually a lack of a feature. Where eyes would have been, though I wouldn't have been able to really see them properly, there was just solid black, like the sockets were hollow. They were wearing a suit, but it was like an amalgam of other suits. A patchwork array of different fabrics and monochromatic colors all sewn together, though it was all done very precisely, like you could actually go into a store and buy it. It wasn't sloppy in the least. Finally, on their head was a top hat, though a subtle one. It was a dark gray, almost gunmetal, and somehow it, as well as the rest of their body, was still. Only their face seemed to be out of focus. I was frozen in fear, once again consumed by the anxiety caused by the unknown and unfamiliar. I simply stood there, face to face with this person, for what seemed like an eternity, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3 seconds. I then felt another warm breath on the back of my neck, which made me instinctively shudder and spin around, only there was no one behind me. Upon seeing this, I turned around once again to keep my eyes on whoever I had just been face to face with, only they were gone. I was alone once again. The feeling of being watched was gone. I was standing next to the truck by myself, the normal sounds of the night surrounding me, and the crippling feeling of anxiety had dissipated. The orange lights on the side of the truck then flickered back on, as did the headlights. I cautiously walked around to the driver's side of the truck and climbed in, finding that when I'd gotten out of the truck, I had left the keys in the ignition, turned to the point that the electrics in the vehicle would be on. I closed the door and attempted to start the truck, and was relieved when there was a rumbling, then the roar of the engine. I didn't think twice before putting it into gear and continuing down Montana Highway 200. There were so many aspects of that night that I didn't understand. I finished the job, and all the while I was trying to rationalize what had happened, and why. It was all so confusing, but it would not be the last time I encountered the same aspects of what happened that night. The person with the vibrating face, the sound and light surges, and that door. That flowery, pastel, freestanding door. I would see them again about 8 months later.